There I was, standing in the narrow aisle of Flight 847, my carry-on bag halfway into the overhead compartment, when this woman all designer clothes and entitled attitude literally grabbed my bag and tried to yank it out. "Excuse me," she snapped, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my luggage handle, "but I need this space for my Hermes bag. Now, I've been flying for 37 years, through business trips, family emergencies, and countless visits to see my grandchildren. I've dealt with crying babies, drunk passengers, and even a medical emergency at 35,000 feet. But I had never, and I mean never, encountered the sheer audacity I was about to witness. Little did she know, I wasn't just some pushover retiree she could bully. And that designer bag she was so desperate to protect? Well, let's just say it was about to take a very expensive trip to the cargo hold. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started and why karma served up the most deliciously satisfying revenge I've ever witnessed. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was flying from Phoenix back home to Portland after spending 2 weeks helping my daughter Sarah through her divorce. At 62, I've learned that family comes first, even when it means sleeping on an air mattress and mediating between my stubborn daughter and her equally stubborn soon-to-be ex-husband. My knees were already aching from the uncomfortable sleeping arrangements, and I was looking forward to nothing more than my own bed and a hot bath. I'd specifically chosen a window seat 14A because I've got this thing about needing to see outside during takeoff. Call it an old habit from my flying nervous days, but watching the ground fall away always calms my nerves. I arrived at the gate with plenty of time to spare. That's another one of those habits you pick up with age, better early than sorry. The waiting area was typical Tuesday morning busy, business travelers pecking at laptops, families corralling restless children, and the usual collection of characters you find in any airport. That's when I first noticed her. She was impossible to miss, really. Mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in what my granddaughter would call a soccer mom bun, wearing a white blazer that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She had this enormous handbag, and when I say enormous, I mean it could have doubled as carry-on luggage for a small family slung over her shoulder like a trophy. But it wasn't her appearance that caught my attention. It was her voice. She was at the counter, and I could hear every word from 20 feet away. The poor gate agent, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, was getting the full treatment. "I don't care what your computer says," she was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone that immediately puts everyone on edge. "I always sit in first class. There must be some mistake." The gate agent, bless his heart, maintained his professional composure. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but your ticket shows seat 23B. That's an aisle seat in economy." "Economy?" She said the word like it was a personal insult. "Do you know who I am? I have status with this airline." I felt a little sorry for the kid. I'd seen this dance before, the customer who thinks volume and indignation will magically create first-class seats out of thin air. What I didn't realize was that this was just the warm-up act. 20 minutes later, when they called for boarding, I gathered my things and got in line with Group 2. I travel light these days, just a small carry-on with wheels and my purse. My back can't handle heavy lifting like it used to, so I've learned to pack smart. The same woman, let's call her Karen, because honestly, if the shoe fits, was somehow in the Group 1 line, despite clearly not having a first-class ticket. When the gate agent politely directed her to the correct line, she huffed and puffed but eventually moved. "This is ridiculous," she muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've been flying longer than that child has been alive." I bit my tongue. At my age, you learn to pick your battles, and this wasn't worth it. Yet, once on the plane, I made my way to row 14, grateful to see that the middle and aisle seats were still empty. Maybe I'd get lucky and have some extra room for the flight home. I stowed my purse under the seat in front of me and was just reaching up to put my carry-on in the overhead bin when I heard that familiar voice behind me. "Oh, perfect, there's space up there." I turned to see Karen approaching with her massive handbag. And when I say massive, I'm talking about something the size of a small suitcase, stuffed so full it looked like it might burst at the seams. "Excuse me," I said politely, "but I was just putting my bag up there." She looked at me like I'd suggested something absurd. "Well, I'm sure there's room for both. Here's the thing about overhead bins on these regional jets, they're not exactly spacious." My small carry-on would fit fine, but her bag was easily twice the size and 3 times as heavy as mine. It was like trying to fit a refrigerator into a closet. I went ahead and placed my bag in the compartment, positioning it neatly against the left side. There was still some space, but not nearly enough for her oversized purse. "See?" I said, trying to be helpful. "There's still a little room, but you might need to find another spot for something that large." That's when her whole demeanor changed. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice had that sharp edge that makes flight attendants materialize out of thin air. "I need that space. Can't you just put your little bag somewhere else?" My little bag contained 2 weeks' worth of carefully packed clothes, my medications, and irreplaceable photos of my grandchildren. I'd paid extra to ensure I could keep it with me. "I'm sorry, but this is my seat, and I was here first," I said, keeping my voice level. "There are other bins." "Listen, sweetheart," she interrupted, and I could feel my blood pressure rising at that condescending tone. "I have very expensive items in this bag. Designer items. They can't just be shoved anywhere. Now, I've raised 3 children and managed a team of 25 people during my 30-year career in banking. I know passive-aggressive behavior when I see it, and I also know when someone is testing your boundaries." "I understand," I replied calmly, "but airline policy is first come, first served for overhead space." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, don't lecture me about airline policy. I probably fly more in a month than you do in a year." That stung a little, I'll admit. But I held my ground. The passengers behind us were starting to get restless. The line was backing up, and I could hear murmurs of frustration. This was exactly the kind of scene that makes air travel miserable for everyone. The first confrontation. That's when Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. Without warning, she reached around me and grabbed the handle of my carry-on bag. "Look, I'll just move this little thing to make room." "Excuse me," I said, louder than I intended. "Please don't touch my belongings." But she was already trying to pull my bag out of the compartment. The woman had the audacity to physically handle my luggage without permission, right there in front of a dozen witnesses. "Ma'am, you need to stop," I said firmly, placing my hand on my bag to prevent her from moving it. "Oh, come on," she scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. I'm just making room. We can both fit our bags if we're smart about it." Here's what she didn't understand: it wasn't about the space. It was about respect. It was about the principle that you can't just take what isn't yours because you think you deserve it more. I said no, I repeated, this time loud enough that other passengers were starting to take notice. A man in the row behind us leaned forward. "Everything okay up there?" Karen whipped around to address him, as if she'd found a sympathetic ear. This woman is being completely unreasonable about sharing overhead space. Sharing? I couldn't help myself. "You mean you want me to move my bag so you can have the entire compartment for your oversized purse?" "It's not oversized," she snapped. "It's a designer bag. It's worth more than your entire outfit." And there it was, the moment when everyone within earshot realized exactly what kind of person we were dealing with. I heard a few sharp intakes of breath and saw some eye rolls from the other passengers. The man behind us shook his head. "Lady, the overhead bins are first come, first served. That's how it works." "Thank you," I said to him gratefully. But Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, she was doubling down on her entitlement. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I guess some people just don't understand courtesy." She made a big show of looking around for another bin, sighing heavily and muttering under her breath about rude passengers and common courtesy. But here's the thing: every other overhead compartment in our section was either full or nearly full. Her massive bag wasn't going to fit anywhere else. After a few minutes of this performance, she came back to our row with a different strategy. "Look," she said, positioning herself so close to me that I could smell her overpowering perfume, "I really need this space. I'm willing to make it worth your while." She reached into her purse, which, remember, she was still carrying because she couldn't find anywhere to put it, and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here," she said, holding it out like she was tipping a bellhop. "For your trouble." I stared at that $20 bill for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of what was happening. This woman was actually trying to bribe me to give up my rightful overhead space. "I don't want your money," I said quietly. "I want you to respect the rules and find another place for your bag." Her face flushed red. "You know what? Fine. Be stubborn. But don't blame me when we're all delayed because of this nonsense." That's when things got really interesting. Karen flagged down a flight attendant, a professional-looking woman named Janet, according to her name tag, who approached with that practiced smile that service industry veterans perfect over years of dealing with difficult customers. "Is there a problem here?" Janet asked politely. Karen immediately launched into her version of events, complete with dramatic gestures and wounded indignation. "This woman is refusing to share overhead space," she began, her voice taking on a victimized tone. "I have a very expensive bag that needs to be stored properly, and she's being completely unreasonable about making room." I waited for her to finish, then calmly stated my side. "I placed my bag in the overhead compartment above my assigned seat. This woman is demanding that I remove it so she can store her oversized bag there instead." Janet looked at both bags, then back at us. You could see her mental calculation. She'd clearly dealt with this exact scenario countless times before. "Ma'am," she said to Karen, "I can see that your bag is quite large. Let me check if there's space in another compartment." "I've already looked," Karen replied impatiently. "There's no room anywhere else. She needs to move her little bag." Janet maintained her professional composure, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. She'd identified the problem passenger, and it wasn't me. "I understand your concern about your bag," Janet said carefully, "but passengers are entitled to overhead space above their assigned seats, assuming their luggage meets size requirements." She glanced at my carry-on, which was clearly within regulation size, then at Karen's enormous handbag. "Ma'am, can you tell me the dimensions of your bag?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "It's a handbag. It doesn't need to meet luggage requirements." "Actually," Janet said gently, "any bag that goes in overhead storage needs to fit within our size guidelines, regardless of whether it's technically luggage or a personal item." I watched Karen's face as she realized she might not win this battle as easily as she'd expected. But she wasn't giving up yet. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice getting louder. "I have connecting flights. I have important items in this bag. You can't seriously expect me to check it. We can certainly arrange to gate check your bag if it won't fit in available overhead space," Janet offered diplomatically. "Gate check." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "This bag is worth more than most people make in a month. I am not checking it." I couldn't help myself. "Then maybe you should have brought a smaller bag." The look she gave me could have melted steel. The plot thickens. That's when Karen played what she thought was her trump card. "I don't think you understand who I am," she said to Janet, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a more authoritative tone. "I'm a Diamond Elite member. I fly this airline exclusively. I spend thousands of dollars a year on flights." She reached into her massive bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like a frequent flyer app. "See? Diamond Elite status. I think I deserve a little accommodation here." Janet glanced at the phone screen, then back at Karen with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I appreciate your loyalty to our airline," Janet said carefully. "However, our overhead bin policy applies to all passengers regardless of status level." Karen's face was getting redder by the minute. You could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice carrying throughout the cabin. "I want to speak to the captain. I want to file a complaint. This is the worst service I've ever experienced." Other passengers were starting to turn around in their seats, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a full-blown scene. A few people were shaking their heads in disgust, not at me, but at Karen's behavior. That's when I noticed something interesting. Janet was still holding Karen's phone, looking at the frequent flyer status screen. Her expression had changed subtly, and she was taking longer to examine it than seemed necessary. "Ma'am," Janet said slowly, "could you tell me your name as it appears on your ticket?" "Catherine Morrison," Karen replied impatiently. "Why?" Janet looked at the phone screen again, then at something else, Karen's boarding pass, which was sticking out of her blazer pocket. "I see," Janet said, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "And this is your frequent flyer account?" "Of course it is," Karen snapped. "I just showed you my Diamond Elite status." But something in Janet's expression told me she'd spotted something that didn't add up. She handed the phone back to Karen with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll be right back," Janet said. "I need to check on something." As Janet walked away, I saw her speaking quietly into her headset. Karen, meanwhile, was growing more agitated by the minute. I can't believe this, she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. 27 years of flying, and this is how I'm treated. The man behind us, the same one who'd supported me earlier, leaned forward again. Ma'am, maybe you could just put some of the items from your bag into a smaller bag and check the rest? Karen turned on him with surprising venom. Don't you dare tell me how to pack my belongings. Mind your own business. Hey, I was just trying to help, he said, raising his hands defensively. Well, don't, she snapped. An elderly woman across the aisle spoke up. Young lady, there's no need to be so rude. We're all just trying to get home. Young lady? Karen repeated incredulously. I'm not the one being difficult here. I'm the one being discriminated against because I have nice things. I bit my tongue to keep from responding. At this point, Karen was doing more damage to her own case than I ever could. When Janet returned 5 minutes later, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by another flight attendant, an older man who looked like he'd seen it all, and a woman in a pilot's uniform. Not the captain, but probably the co-pilot. The sight of 3 crew members approaching our row caused a ripple of excitement through the cabin. Phones came out. Passengers craned their necks to get a better view. This was clearly about to become the kind of in-flight drama that would end up on social media within hours. Ma'am, Janet said to Karen, I need to speak with you about your ticket. Karen's confident demeanor faltered slightly. My ticket? What about my ticket? The co-pilot stepped forward. Could you show me your boarding pass, please? Karen fumbled in her blazer pocket and produced a slightly crumpled boarding pass. The co-pilot examined it carefully, then looked at something on a tablet she was carrying. And could you show me some identification? Identification? Karen's voice cracked slightly. Why do you need identification? I'm already on the plane. Just standard procedure, the co-pilot said calmly. Karen reluctantly produced her driver's license. I couldn't see it from where I was standing, but I watched the co-pilot's face as she compared it to the boarding pass and whatever information was on her tablet. After what felt like an eternity, the co-pilot looked up. Ma'am, there seems to be a discrepancy with your ticket. The cabin got noticeably quieter. Even the chatty family a few rows back had stopped talking. A discrepancy? Karen's voice was getting higher and more strained. What kind of discrepancy? According to our records, the co-pilot said carefully, this boarding pass was issued to a Catherine Morrison. But your identification shows a different name. Karen's face went pale. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Additionally, the co-pilot continued, the frequent flyer account you showed our flight attendant belongs to Catherine Morrison, not to the name on your identification. The silence in the cabin was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. I can explain, Karen started to say. Ma'am, are you traveling on someone else's ticket? The co-pilot asked directly. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. It's complicated. Catherine is she's my business partner. She couldn't make the flight, so I'm using her ticket. It's completely legitimate. The male flight attendant spoke up for the first time. Ma'am, airline tickets are non-transferable. You cannot use someone else's ticket, even with their permission. But I paid for it. Karen protested. Catherine works for me. I paid for her ticket, so it's really my ticket. The co-pilot shook her head. That's not how it works. Each ticket must be used by the person whose name appears on it. This is a federal requirement. I watched this exchange with growing amazement. Here was this woman who'd spent the last 20 minutes berating me about my luggage, flashing her Diamond Elite status and talking about how much money she spent with the airline, and it turned out she was flying on someone else's ticket. The irony was delicious. The confrontation peaks. Karen was in full panic mode now. Look, this is a misunderstanding. I travel all the time. I've never had a problem before. Surely we can work something out. The co-pilot was unmoved. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. We need to verify your identity and determine whether you're authorized to be on this flight. You can't be serious, Karen said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. I have connecting flights. I have meetings. You can't just kick me off the plane over a technicality. It's not a technicality, the co-pilot replied firmly. It's federal law. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Do you know how much trouble you're going to be in for this? She threatened, pointing a manicured finger at the co-pilot. I have connections. I know people. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. The co-pilot's expression hardened. Ma'am, threatening crew members is a serious offense. I'm going to ask you one more time to come with me voluntarily. But Karen was beyond reason now. I'm not going anywhere. This is discrimination. This is harassment. I demand to speak to someone in charge. You are speaking to someone in charge, the co-pilot said calmly. The male flight attendant stepped forward. Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. But either way, you're coming with us. That's when Karen played her final, desperate card. She suddenly grabbed my carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, clutching it to her chest like a shield. Fine, she said wildly. If I can't fly, then neither can she. This bag could contain anything. How do you know she's not a security threat? The entire cabin gasped. Several passengers stood up. Someone screamed. I was so shocked I couldn't even speak. This woman, this entitled, fraudulent woman, was now holding my belongings hostage and making terroristic threats. The co-pilot immediately got on her radio. Security to gate B12 immediately. We have a passenger making threats and interfering with other passengers' property. Put the bag down, the male flight attendant said, his voice stern and authoritative. No, Karen clutched my bag tighter. Not until someone listens to me. Not until someone treats me with respect. What happened next was like something out of a movie. Within 2 minutes, airport security officers were boarding the plane. Not 1 or 2, but 4 uniformed officers who moved with purpose and authority. Ma'am, put the bag down and step away, the lead officer commanded. Karen looked around wildly, perhaps suddenly realizing that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The entire cabin was staring at her with a mixture of horror and fascination. I was just, she stammered. Ma'am, you're under arrest for making terroristic threats, interfering with flight operations, and theft, the officer said, producing handcuffs. Theft? Karen's voice was barely a whisper. You're in possession of another passenger's property against their will. That's theft. As the officers approached, Karen finally released my bag, letting it fall to the floor. I quickly retrieved it, checking to make sure nothing was damaged. Please don't, she begged as the handcuffs clicked into place. I didn't mean it. I was just upset. I would never actually hurt anyone. But the damage was done. As they escorted her off the plane, she was crying not the angry, indignant tears from before, but genuine tears of regret and fear. My connecting flights, she sobbed. My meetings. My job. What am I going to do? No one answered her. As the security officers led her away, I heard one of them radioing ahead. Suspect is carrying a large handbag. We'll need to search it thoroughly. The co-pilot returned to our section a few minutes later. Ma'am, she said to me, I apologize for what you just experienced. That was completely unacceptable. It's not your fault, I replied, though I was still shaking a little from the adrenaline. Is your bag okay? Do you need us to inspect it for damage? I checked it over carefully. Everything seemed fine. I think it's okay. Good. And just so you know, we've contacted the authorities at your destination as well. They'll want to take a statement from you when you land. Then Janet, the flight attendant who'd started this whole investigation, approached with a small smile. Ma'am, there's one more thing. We've been in contact with security, and they discovered something interesting about that woman's bag. What's that? I asked. It turns out that designer bag she was so protective of? It's a fake. A very good fake, but a fake nonetheless. She was making all that fuss over a counterfeit purse. I couldn't help but laugh. After all the drama, all the threats, all the claims about expensive designer items, it turned out Karen's precious bag wasn't even real. But Janet wasn't done yet. There's more, she said. Remember how she claimed to have Diamond Elite status? Well, we checked with customer service. The real Catherine Morrison, the woman whose ticket and frequent flyer account she was using, does have Diamond Elite status. But she's been trying to report identity theft for the past 2 weeks. Apparently, someone has been using her information to book flights. The pieces were falling into place. Karen wasn't just an entitled passenger with an oversized bag. She was a fraud who'd been stealing someone else's identity to travel. So she was never supposed to be on this flight at all? I asked. Nope. And now she's facing federal charges for identity theft, wire fraud, and making terroristic threats. That little tantrum just turned what might have been a civil matter into a very serious criminal case. The sweet aftermath. As we prepared for takeoff about 45 minutes behind schedule, one settled into my window seat with my carry-on bag safely stowed in the overhead compartment where it belonged. The man behind me leaned forward one more time. That was incredible. I can't believe she was using someone else's ticket this whole time. I know, I replied. And to think, all of this started because she wanted more overhead bin space. The elderly woman across the aisle chimed in. Honey, I've been flying for 60 years, and I have never seen anything like that. The audacity of some people. As the plane pushed back from the gate, I looked out my window and saw security vehicles still parked near the terminal. Karen was probably being processed right about then, her fake designer bag inventoried as evidence. Janet stopped by my seat one more time before takeoff. Ma'am, the captain wanted me to give you this. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for your patience during today's disruption. Your calm handling of a difficult situation was exemplary. Please accept these vouchers for future travel as our appreciation. There were 2 vouchers for free domestic flights, each worth up to $500. That's very kind, I said, genuinely touched. It's the least we can do, Janet replied. And just between you and me, that woman picked the wrong person to mess with. We had reports about her from 3 previous flights. She's been using different people's tickets and frequent flyer accounts for months. You helped us catch someone who was costing our airline and our legitimate customers thousands of dollars. As we climbed into the Arizona sky, I reflected on the morning's events. What had started as a simple dispute over overhead bin space had turned into something much bigger, a case of identity theft, fraud, and ultimately, justice. I thought about Karen, probably sitting in an airport security office right then, facing the consequences of her choices. Her desperate grab for my luggage had been the final straw, but it was really just the culmination of months or maybe years of entitlement and dishonesty. There's something satisfying about seeing justice served, especially when it comes to people who think the rules don't apply to them. Karen had spent the entire confrontation acting like she was better than everyone else, like her needs were more important than anyone else's, like her fake status and counterfeit bag made her special. In the end, the truth came out. It always does. The landing. When we touched down in Portland 3 hours later, I was met at the gate by airport security officers who took my statement about the incident. They told me that Karen was being held pending federal charges, and that the real Catherine Morrison had been notified that her identity thief had been caught. This is a bigger case than you might think, one officer told me. We've been tracking a ring of people who steal frequent flyer accounts and use them to book flights with stolen credit cards. Your incident today might have broken the whole thing open. I gave them my contact information in case they needed follow-up testimony, then collected my checked bag and headed home. But the story doesn't end there. 3 weeks later, I received a call from the FBI. They wanted to interview me about Karen's case, which had indeed led to a larger investigation. It turned out she was part of a sophisticated identity theft ring that had been operating across multiple airlines for over 2 years. The agent I spoke with told me that my decision to stand my ground over something as simple as overhead bin space had helped bring down a criminal enterprise that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from airlines and legitimate travelers. Sometimes, the agent said, the biggest cases start with the smallest incidents. Your refusal to be bullied made all the difference. But here's the best part of the whole story. 6 months later, I was at Phoenix Sky Harbor again, visiting my daughter Sarah, who, by the way, is doing much better post-divorce. The whole ordeal had actually brought us closer together. She'd been amazed when I told her about the Karen incident, saying she'd never seen her mild-mannered mom take such a strong stand. It made me realize that maybe I'd been too accommodating my whole life, always trying to keep the peace instead of standing up for what was right. This particular trip had been different from the last one. Instead of sleeping on an air mattress and mediating arguments, I'd spent 2 wonderful weeks helping Sarah paint her new apartment and spoiling my grandchildren. Little Emma, who's 6 now, had insisted on hearing the airplane story every night before bed. She especially loved the part where the mean lady got arrested. Grandma, she'd said in that serious way children have, you were very brave. I want to be brave like you when I grow up. Those words stayed with me as I made my way to gate B12 for my flight home to Portland. The same gate where it all started. I arrived early, as always, and settled into one of those uncomfortable airport chairs with my book and a cup of coffee that cost more than a whole pot used to cost back in my day. The gate area was busy for a Thursday afternoon. Spring break season was winding down, so there were families with tired children, college students heading back to school, and the usual mix of business travelers. I was enjoying the people watching and trying to lose myself in my novel when I heard it. That voice, that tone, that unmistakable sound of someone who believes the world owes them special treatment. I don't care what your computer says. I always sit in first class. My head snapped up so fast I nearly spilled my coffee. Standing at the gate counter was a woman who could have been Karen's twin sister in attitude if not appearance. This one was closer to my age, probably mid-60s, with perfectly styled silver hair and a navy blue blazer that screamed expensive. She had the same enormous handbag, the same imperious posture, the same entitled expression that I remembered all too well. The poor gate agent, a different young man than the one from my infamous encounter, but with the same look of professional patience, wearing thin, was trying to explain something to her. "Ma'am, according to our records, your ticket is for seat 18C, which is in our main cabin. I don't show any first-class assignment for this reservation." "Well then your records are wrong," she snapped, leaning forward aggressively. "I've been flying first class for 30 years. I have status. I have connections. There must be some mistake." I felt a chill run down my spine. The words were almost identical to what Karen had said. The gestures, the tone, even the way she positioned her oversized bag on the counter like it was some kind of weapon, it was all eerily familiar. Other passengers were starting to notice. A businessman looked up from his laptop with an annoyed expression. A young mother pulled her toddler closer, instinctively moving away from the confrontation. An elderly gentleman shook his head in disgust. But this time was different. The gate agent, his name tag read Marcus, didn't seem flustered or intimidated. Instead, he maintained eye contact and spoke with calm authority. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I need to verify some information. Could I please see your identification and boarding pass?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "My identification? Why would you need that? I'm already checked in. It's part of our new security protocols," Marcus explained patiently. "We're required to verify passenger identity at certain checkpoints." I nearly dropped my book. New security protocols. They were actually checking now. The woman fumbled in her massive purse, producing a boarding pass and driver's license with obvious reluctance. Marcus examined them carefully, then typed something into his computer. His expression changed subtly as he read whatever appeared on his screen. "Ma'am, I'm showing a discrepancy between your identification and the name on this boarding pass. Could you explain that for me?" The woman's face went pale, then flushed red. It's complicated. The ticket was purchased by my employer. Corporate account. Perfectly legitimate." Marcus nodded politely. "I understand. Let me just make a quick call to verify this with our security team." As Marcus picked up his phone, the woman began to panic. I could see it in her eyes, the same desperate look Karen had gotten when she realized her scheme was falling apart. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice getting louder. "I've been flying this airline for decades. I've never been treated like a criminal before." Marcus finished his brief phone conversation and hung up. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside while we sort this out. Airport security is on their way to assist." "Security?" The woman's voice cracked. "For what? I haven't done anything wrong." But she had, and everyone in the gate area could sense it. The same entitled attitude, the same fake indignation, the same desperate attempts to bluster her way out of trouble. Within 5 minutes, 2 uniformed security officers appeared. They approached the woman with professional courtesy but unmistakable authority. "Ma'am, we need to verify your identity and travel authorization. Could you please come with us?" "This is harassment," she protested as they escorted her away from the gate. "I'll be filing complaints. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." The threats sounded hollow and desperate, nothing like the confident bluster she'd started with. Her oversized bag, clutched tightly to her chest, looked more like a security blanket than a status symbol. As they disappeared around the corner toward the security office, the gate area buzzed with excited conversation. Passengers were pulling out phones, already posting about the drama they'd just witnessed. "Did you see that?" a college-aged girl whispered to her friend. "She was totally using someone else's ticket." "I can't believe people actually do that," her friend replied. "Don't they know they'll get caught?" I smiled to myself. 6 months ago, they might not have gotten caught. But now they did. When boarding began 30 minutes later, I was pleasantly surprised to see Janet working the flight again. She spotted me immediately as I handed her my boarding pass. "It's you," she said with a big smile. "Our hero passenger." "Hero?" I laughed, though I felt a warm glow at the recognition. "I just wanted to keep my luggage where it belonged." "Well, because of your case, we now have new protocols in place," Janet explained as we walked down the jetway. "We check identification against boarding passes much more carefully, and we flag anyone who shows frequent flyer status that doesn't match their ticket information. You'd be amazed how many people we've caught since then." She leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice so other passengers wouldn't hear. "That woman they just arrested? She would have gotten away with it 6 months ago. But now we know what to look for. The system you saw in action today, the ID verification, the security response time, the protocols, all of that came from recommendations after your incident." As I settled into my seat, the same window seat, 14A, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because justice had been served again, but because my willingness to stand up to Karen had created ripple effects that were still protecting other passengers months later. The flight attendant continued, "Between you and me, we've caught over 24 identity thieves since implementing the new procedures. Each one represents thousands of dollars in fraud that would have cost the airline and legitimate passengers. And it all started with you refusing to give up your overhead bin space." As we prepared for takeoff, I looked out my window at the Phoenix skyline and reflected on how much had changed. My daughter was stronger and happier. My grandchildren saw me as someone who stood up for what was right. And complete strangers were safer because I'd refused to be bullied. Sometimes standing up for yourself does more than just protect your own interests. Sometimes it helps protect everyone else too. And as I watched another would-be scammer getting what she deserved, I couldn't help but think, Karen would be so proud.